What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Ryan Manion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Manion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. Okay, we are back with another episode of the Resilient Life podcast. Today's guest is Don Faul, the CEO of CrossFit. It's an honor to have you here on the show. As we were saying before we got on camera, I've heard so much about you. You've been a supporter of the Travis Manion Foundation, and you know, I was reading doing a little research, as any good podcast host will do. And I actually, of course, I knew you were a Marine. I did not know you were a Naval Academy graduate, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it was really kind of, you know, it was looking at your path from the Naval Academy to the Marine Corps to First Reconnaissance, and I was like, wow, you could put that down on paper, and that was my brother Travis. So
yeah, crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor for me, and I guess more importantly, thank you for what you do. Really appreciate it. So excited to spend some time with you today.
Yeah. So, well, let's take it back to your USNA days. What brought you to the Naval Academy?
Oh gosh, you know, it's funny. I didn't grow up in a military family. I grew up in a little town in New Jersey. I had an uncle who served in Vietnam. Both my grandfathers served in World War II, but I didn't grow up in an environment where a lot of folks had served. Actually, the little town I grew up in, it was kind of unheard of. But throughout high school, had actually a friend who a couple of years ahead of me who had gone to the Naval Academy. That kind of piqued my interest. My parents had always talked a lot about the importance of service, you know, in any capacity. And so I decided in high school that, you know, I either wanted to go, if I could, go the Naval Academy route or do ROTC, serve. And, you know, went down I think it was my junior high school to visit Annapolis. And there was just something about the experience for me that totally clicked. And so, you know, was fortunate enough to get in, and, you know, that's kind of where it started for me.
Yeah. Well, I went through the experience with my brother. We were just a year apart, so we were in college together. And, you know, I always joke that Travis was on Friday nights calling me. I went to Widener University, which is in Philadelphia, not too far, you know, hour and a half to Navy. And he would be like, hey, why don't you bring some friends down for the weekend, you know? So I was always good at supplying my lacrosse girls to come down and hang out with the wrestlers. But I watched, you know, I saw it from that perspective, you know, as a sibling. I'm now going through it as a parent. My daughter is a plebe at the Naval Academy, and and she's in it. And, you know, you get how's your daughter doing at college? Does she love it? And I'm like, well, I said, she's happy she's there and she made the right decision. Does she love it right now? No, she doesn't love it, but she's where
love
she
is not a term you use to apply it, especially your first plebe year at the Naval Academy.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
I'm like, ask me next year. I mean, she'll love it a little more next year. So, so you get there, and then what made you to decide to go Marine Corps out of Navy?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I mean, I knew zero about the military going to the academy, and you know, had no context. If you would ask me plebe year, I would have said I wanted to be an NFL. Like, I didn't have good enough eyes to fly. I'm like, oh, you know, that was the like post Top Gun era. Like, oh, it'd be cool to do that. Having zero idea whether or not that would be a good fit for me. And then, as you know, right, the Naval Academy kind of deliberately exposes you to different parts of the naval service, right? So you spend time with the Marines, you spend time with the Navy. And I think it was after plebe year, spent a month down in Quantico, and you know, going through the experience there. And there's just something about that clicked for me, you know, culturally, as you know, right. Each of the branches has a slightly different culture.
Yep.
And, you know, the Marine kind of servant leadership, sleep in the dirt next to your Marines, you know, Marine officers, Marine leaders eat last. that really clicked for me. So, from that summer on, it was really clear to me that I wanted to, be a Marine. I wanted to go Marine ground.
Awesome. And you, like, super interesting time for you because you graduated from Navy. And I always talk about, like, my brother's class coming in 99. They came in and then the world changed for them while they were students there.
Yeah.
But it had to be wild for you too. And what did that look like in terms of, like, you're down at the basic school and then the next thing you know, you're going out into the fleet and, like, the world changes. And, like, what did that look like from the perspective of being a Marine at that time?
Yeah. This will sound nuts, but, I graduated in 98 and, it had been a while since, the country had been at war. We had Somalia in 93, Gulf War in 91, but those were kind of distant past. And so the expectation going in was like, you graduate, you do your 5-6 years, you see the world a bit. There honestly wasn't I'd say a realistic expectation that you would actually go deploy. That sounds nuts given the nature of what the academy is all about, but that was kind of the reality at that point. I got stationed out at Pendleton. I was an infantry officer and, I deployed with the 15th MU in August of 2001. And that was literally, hey, let's get excited. We're going to go to Thailand and Singapore, and maybe we'll get a port visit in Australia, get to see the world a little bit. And so I deployed in August of 2001. And then our first stop, we did a few days in Hawaii, and then we went to Australia and spent a week training in Darwin, Australia, up in the Northern Territory with the Australian Army. And we were, on the tail end of it, our first day off on, since we had gotten there on September 11th. And so we watched, 9/11 from an Irish bar in Darwin, Australia, at 10 at night, other side of the world. And, we did a recall that night and everyone got back on ship and, the MU was off to the Arabian Gulf.
Wow.
And so the world changed in an instant for a lot of folks. And we just happened to be, at that point, we knew the nature of the deployment was going to change in a pretty fundamental sort of way.
Yeah, that's kind of wild to be in, kind of doing your, I don't want to call any deployment fun, but, fun deployment.
Yeah, it was a go see the world, exciting. And that changed.
And, I always say my dad used to talk about, well, he still talks about it because he was 30-year Marine. And he's like, I did less in my 30 years than these men and women post 9/11, did in 2-3 years. And and certainly for us, not that it would have changed the trajectory of what Travis did or him going to Navy, but like, when he entered in there, our dad had been a Marine for 20 years at that point. And we grew up in a relatively peaceful time. And so, you kind of thought that it would look like that. And that's what it was going to be. And, one of the things that I found so incredible when I kind of look back and digest the last 20 years and 20 plus years at this point of these men and women and everybody that stepped up to serve was this grateful enthusiasm in wanting to play a role in the fight. And so much so that, Travis was a logistician. He got logistics coming out of TBS. Much to his dismay, he had infantry as one and the
quality spread.
Yeah.
I'm sure
they said you're he did everything he could to graduate top 5 and he did. And then they said you're logistics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so he went on his first deployment as a logistics officer. And, really for us, we were, well, I say we, my mom and I were very happy he was a logistics officer, like, behind the lines doing what he was doing. And that's when he came back, he was like, I got to do more. And that's when he went first recon before he headed out on his second deployment. And so, a lot of that changed for him, but just that men and women were really wanted to be with their brothers and sisters and do all they could. And so I think it really speaks to like the spirit and unity of our country as a whole, so.
Couldn't agree more. I remember getting back from overseas, that first deployment, and it was probably April of 90, or it's up 2002, somewhere in that time frame. And I just remember coming home and being blown away by the flags everywhere. And, that was a really special moment.
Yeah.
As tragic as 9/11 was, it certainly, I think, brought our country together, and inspired a lot of people to, to step up and serve in whatever capacity.
Yeah.
It was a pretty, again, a tragic circumstance, but out of it, I think, came a lot of, calling for a lot of people.
Yeah, I always talk about like September 11th and remembering that day, but also remembering September 12th, because I
Yeah.
don't think you ever felt, I know I haven't in my 45 years of life, have not felt that type of unity as a country as we felt on September 12th. And like
Yeah.
we were all in it together, like this collective of like, this was our country and we were going to support and defend it in many different ways, some of that in military uniform, but we were all in together. And it was a beautiful feeling. I hope we get it back someday.
I know, exactly. And yeah, hopefully we won't need a circumstance like that, but hopefully,
Correct.
Americans can, we can remember that we are all in this together.
Yeah.
Right?
So after you got out of the Marine Corps, you did some different stuff with Athos, with Google. Like, what did that transition look like for you? Was that an easy transition?
No,
No.
it's
Okay.
funny. And being just old now, having talked to a lot of veterans who have transitioned, the transition's so hard. I've actually got two younger brothers, both Marine veterans as well. They both went through the transition. For me, it was, I got off active duty in summer or towards the end of 2003. So I got back from Iraq and, made the decision to transition. I had this, I say, excitement about the next phase of my life. I didn't know what it looked like, but like I was ready for whatever that was, being a civilian, normal person, and had a great summer on terminal leave in San Diego. It was awesome. And then I started to interview for jobs and quickly went from excitement to, oh my God, what did I do? I'm never going to figure out anything that gives me any sort of purpose or
Yeah.
excitement and I was a grunt. I was a Marine infantry, like trying to figure out how that transitions, what that set me up for was really tough. So I ended up, I did a bunch of interviews, with traditional military headhunters. Honestly, there was nothing that was remotely interesting. I went through a really rough patch of like, gosh, maybe I made a big mistake. I ended up applying to go to grad school, largely to kick the can on getting a job, to try to figure it out. I was lucky enough to get into school, and that gave me a chance to kind of figure out what the right career path was and figure out how to interview and all that stuff.
I think that is such a big misconception too, when you talk about military transition and, veterans transitioning into their next role, that it is just the young enlisted guys that have trouble transitioning, where in fact, I think it's even more the case, which what I have found anecdotally is that it's more the officer that has trouble transitioning. And a lot of that is around this idea of, I think you guys are attuned to like, you're not just looking for a job, you're looking for a purpose, right? And if that doesn't exist, like what happens next? And that's a lot of what we talk about at the Travis Manion Foundation, is making sure, for us, we're like, hey, maybe you just have to get that job. We'll give you that purpose at TMF. Like we can be that secondary offset for you guys to have that purpose and passion. But I see it a lot with a lot of transition veterans.
I think you're 100% right. I actually think, to some degree, the longer you've been on active duty, the more senior you are, the harder the transition is.
Totally.
And I think there is on top of the purpose piece for me, and I think a lot of vets who I talk to, it's hard to figure out. I think it's very easy to look superficially. Like I'll speak for myself. I'm a Marine infantry officer. I learned a set of skills that applied to that. Everything I'm looking at feels so foreign. I didn't personally have a desire to go into, military contracting or law enforcement, all great careers, but that wasn't really what called me. I wanted to do something different, which made it really hard to say, how do I how could what I did in the Marine Corps possibly be relevant in the technology industry or in finance? Or I didn't even know how to think about it. I felt really unqualified for every job I interviewed for. I didn't know how to talk about my experience in a way that felt relevant. I didn't know how to, the language used in the military, Marine Corps is really different than the language. So these like little things that when they add up, I think make for a really, really intimidating start. I told my brothers when I was transitioning, like, hey, the beginning is going to be really hard and demoralizing. And you're going to spend the first 3 months, and there's going to be a point you're going to call me and say, I'm never going to get a job. I'm never going to find a job. Fast forward 3 or 4 more months, you're going to start to turn the corner. The conversations will you'll learn a little bit more, but it can be a really tricky transition. And I think you come to realize that I ultimately came to realize that actually, my first job was at Google. I knew zero about technology, like nothing. And, felt coming in like I didn't have any of the skills or experience that were relevant, working in that environment, but came to find out pretty quickly, actually, that things I learned as a Marine officer, like bringing people together, leadership, uniting people around a common purpose, motivating people, building a team that supported each other. Turns out all of those things are actually the most important things in just about every industry. It just took me a little bit of time to figure that out.
Yeah, totally. I tell this story a lot, but after I had my my third child, I decided I didn't want to be a runner anymore. I wanted to get into bike riding and cycling. And I did what I think every girl would do. You go buy the pretty stuff before you even test out if that's what you want to do. So I went to the bike shop in town and I'm like, I'm going to buy a cycle. I'm going to be a cyclist now. This is my new thing. And I'm in the bike shop and I'm wearing a TMF shirt and this guy's helping me out and, really great. And he says, I love TMF. I'm a big fan. And I was like, oh, thanks. I'm like, I said, did you serve? He said, I did. Yeah. And I said, oh, what did you do? And he said, oh, I'm a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army. I went to West Point. And I had like word vomit. I said, why are you working in a bike shop? Like it was the first thing that came out of my mouth. And he basically shared with me that he had so much trouble transitioning. Like he started at one defense contractor and then like flopped around to a few different ones and just was like miserable. And he was a cyclist and he was like, I'm going to go do what brings me joy. And this is what brings me joy. And I mean, by the time he was rolling my new bike into my car, I was like, come work for me. And he did. And he worked for me for many years. But it was this idea, like I couldn't help myself when I was like, but then I got it. And he went on to like be such a great advocate for sharing that story of like, find what brings you purpose, So
it sounds so simple. And yet it's actually quite elusive. And I think you have this, at least again, for me, I felt like there were like the things I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
The career path that was like the one that you should pursue by virtue of like what society would deem to be successful, et cetera, versus like there's a point at which, and it sounds like this guy you referenced figured it out probably earlier than most of us, that like what you should do is the thing that lights you up and brings you joy and brings you happiness and excitement. And, that's such a cool thing.
Well, and I also think too that people don't talk about that, right? When you're going through that transition process, they're going to get you into career fairs. They're going to say, okay, what did you do? Oh, you were a mechanic in the military? Then we're going to find like mechanic jobs out. It's all this like looking at what's on paper, right? As opposed to saying, where do your strengths and passions lie outside of the military? And let's like dive deeper into that. So, so you did some different stuff. You were the CEO of Athos, and there you met actually one of, and he worked for you at Athos, one of my good friends, Gabe Rengel. And I shared with Gabe that I was talking to you today, and he had such great things to say about you as a leader. It was pretty awesome. I'll share it with you offline. I'll shoot you his text, but he's the last thing he said is make sure you tell Don that he still can't beat me in a workout. So he wanted.
Well, that's if you had not closed with that, I would have doubted that it was actually Gabe if he's just said all nice things. But No, Gabe's an amazing. We worked together really closely at Athos, had some really awesome experiences, and yeah, he's an amazing guy, doing really cool, continues to do really cool things.
Yeah, so we got connected with Gabe through he reached out to us because he trains a bunch of Philadelphia Eagles, and we ended up working with Lane Johnson, who Lane was meeting with Gold Star families. And so we worked with them. So before games, we'd connect him, and we're still doing a bunch with Lane, but it really was all because of Gabe. It was Gabe just saying, like, you have to be connected to this military community. And so, yeah, great guy. And, but yeah, a lot to say with you. But, the last thing he did say was like, your love for physical fitness, and you're in the perfect spot that you are now over at CrossFit. So he was.
Oh, well, yeah, that's nice of him. Yeah, I feel really fortunate. And that's, honestly where I guess the career journey around kind of fitness sports started, was at Athos with Gabe.
Yeah. And then, again, coming full circle, like finding that cross sector of doing something that brings you joy, that you love, that,
Totally.
outside. So let's talk about CrossFit too, how you got first introduced to CrossFit. Were you a Marine when you first got introduced to CrossFit?
No. So actually I was too old. So I missed, CrossFit didn't really start, I think, with DOD until probably 2004 or so. I kind of just missed it. I wish it had been around. I'm kind of embarrassed when I think back about the type of physical training we used to do. We just did dumb stuff. So I wish we had CrossFit. I would have been a lot smarter about how we trained. I discovered it actually. So I got off active duty. I had, played sports growing up, and obviously, in the Marine Corps, a lot of physical training. I played rugby for a long time. And then, basically my body started falling apart, lots of injuries. I got into triathlon for about a decade. Broke a bunch of other stuff. And this is while I was working at Google, Facebook. And back in 2014, I was working in San Francisco and had a buddy of mine who I used to run with, who said, hey, what do you think about trying CrossFit? And I had some pretty bad low back issues from some of the stuff I had done in the Marine Corps, some of my time, with triathlon. And so I was actually reticent to try it. I thought, I may not be able to do it. He was persistent, dragged me into this gym in San Francisco, and it ended up being life-changing for me. That actually the core strength and the focus on mobility and movements, like my back issues went away. And then for me, I just fell in love with the community side. I felt like, I told people, it felt like the closest thing for me to feeling like I was on a team again.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing CrossFit about 10 years now. And so about 2 years ago, had a friend of mine who knew I had been doing CrossFit for a while, who knew I had been working kind of, at Athos in the sports fitness, human performance side. And he called me and said, hey, heard CrossFit's looking for someone. Would you be interested? It was, that led to conversations and ultimately the opportunity.
Yeah. Full circle moment. I was introduced to CrossFit very early on because one of Travis's best friends, was Jimmy Letchford, who, Jimmy and Travis wrestled together at Navy, and then they served in the Marine Corps together. And, Jimmy got out of the Marines, and he was one of CrossFit's first employees. Helped
build it.
Yeah. And it was after Travis was killed, when the Manion WOD was being put together. Jimmy was the one who, because I don't know how the WODs work now, the Hero WODs, but back in the day, you actually had to show proof that the Hero WOD that was named after, that they had actually done CrossFit. Like that they, so Jimmy had to be like, trust me, Travis was utilizing the CrossFit community. He did CrossFit. I'm vouching for it. We had no physical, documentation or proof of showing it, but Jimmy's like, no. So he was the one that actually, not only got the Hero WOD for Travis, the Manion WOD, given out by CrossFit and but sanctioned by CrossFit, but also he's the one that built the WOD. So anybody that has a problem with that WOD and how disgusting it is on your legs, you can blame Jimmy Letchford for that.
Perfect.
But what I love about it is, you know, he said when he came to my dad and I, and he said, listen, this is the Manion WOD. This is what it looks like as prescribed. And we were like, that's terrible. No one's going to do that. And he was like, guess what? Guess who would do it? Your brother would do it. And I'm like, you're damn right. And he based it.
Was right.
Yeah.
Right?
And he based it really built around like Travis's legs were like tree trunks. Like that's where all his strength derived from, and on the wrestling mat. And so he just wanted to be this killer leg workout. And in fact, we did it down at, I think it was like the second or third. It was in 2010. So the Manion WOD had only been an official WOD for a couple years at that point. And we went down to the Blue and Gold CrossFit at the Academy, Jimmy and I.
Oh, awesome.
And we did it with some mids. And we're like, let's do the workout with some mids. And so it was me, Jimmy, his wife, Madeline, and then another friend of ours, Carlo Picori, who was a first recon Marine. And we got done the WOD, and Carlo was like puking in a trash can on the side, and all the mids were like, you got it, man, you know? And he was like, looking at Jimmy, he was like, why would you put this workout together? Like, this is terrible. But, you know, I'll say for us, that Hero WOD and the Hero WODs that CrossFit does, I think it really ties into when you talk about community, right? And so for us, we could not be more grateful for CrossFit, not just creating the Manion WOD, but all of the Hero WODs that you do. And I think it lends to, you know, people in our community that talk about that do CrossFit or part of the CrossFit community as well. It means something to them. That it's more than just a workout.
No question.
Yeah.
I you know, couldn't agree more. I think it reinforces community and service.
Yeah.
And you know, two things that, you know, obviously Travis represented, you know, better than anyone, and is, I think, very core. It really resonates with the CrossFit community. And, you know, you've seen it, right? If you're in an affiliate doing a Hero WOD and the coach takes the opportunity to talk a little bit about the why, it's really special and really powerful.
Yeah. And I love what, you know, we've taken the Manion WOD and really we push it out to, we have so many. I think last year we had more CrossFit gyms than ever participating, which was really awesome. But, you know, another thing that we do is we bring it out to high schools as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So we have them scale it, you know, and, but, you know, just being able to see these kids out there pushing themselves. I did it at a park right here in Doylestown in Pennsylvania, and we had it on a Saturday morning, and it was all our TMF service clubs run by kids. And they got out there, and they were certainly like, they were competing against each other, because some of these were like rival high school teams, and they were coming out, and the competition that was happening was like so awesome to see, and like how much they got. And, you know, some of them showed up thinking they were going to like partner the WOD with a friend, and then they were like, no, we're doing it, you know. And just watching these young kids push themselves was so awesome. For them to know, you know, I always say, like, I use physical challenges as a way to like push myself to honor those we've lost. For me, it's about like, nothing we're going to do is going to be as hard as what they did. And so it's the greatest motivator that there can be.
Totally.
Yeah.
I've got 3 daughters, and they're still pretty young, but my oldest is 11 now. And, you know, she is full on into sports, got her into doing CrossFit this past summer. And actually, I love the Hero WOD piece, because it's an opportunity to teach her, right, and to teach them about sacrifice, about serving others, about the importance of it, about doing hard things, right, in the presence of others, and the value that, and, you know, as a very proud dad, getting to see her like that glint in her eye of like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to tackle this, and the pride after it. It's a really, really special thing.
Yeah.
And so very, very cool.
Yeah. I had a memory pop up in my Facebook from like, it was like 15 years ago today. And it was my oldest daughter, who's at Navy now. And, you know, another Naval Academy 2004 grad, Terrence Fettingham, had a CrossFit gym, CrossFit T1 right in Philadelphia. And, and it was a picture of him. Maggie was like 5, and he had created, it was on the board, it was Maggie's first CrossFit workout,
wow.
and he created a little WOD for her, and it was a picture of her doing the WOD, and I was like, that's so cool. And here she is, playing lacrosse at Navy, and
Amazing.
getting her into that super early. So I'm all about that. What is your favorite Hero WOD to do?
That's a really good question. I love this one. I really do enjoy it, but it's too cliched. I love doing Murph.
Yeah, sure.
That, and both, I really like the workout. I also will say I do like Manion. That one's kind of built, it's painful, but I really enjoy it. I love the squats. I love the running. I'm not great at either of them, but it's a fun workout.
Yeah.
The other one I'll say, and I've only done this a few times because it's so painful, but Kalsu. Have you done Kalsu?
No. What is that?
It's evil. It's 100 thrusters. I think it's 135.95, and I think every minute on the minute you have to do 5 burpees.
Ooh.
So it's just a absolutely brutal workout, and you've got the mind game of like, how fast do I go? Because I've got to do more burpees. But
Yeah.
we actually last summer I got a bunch of buddies who I've been doing CrossFit with for 10 years now, and we did full summer, like as many Hero WODs as we could. So we tried to we were doing 1 or 2 of them a week. So super fun to just check a bunch off.
Yeah, that's awesome. We also were down at, you guys were grateful enough to let us come down to the CrossFit Kids Games. And so we were down there. Yeah. And we ran modified Manion WODs with the kids down there. And, our team loved it. There's a quote from you, and it may not be your favorite quote. Maybe it is. I don't know. But it resonated so much with me because I think about like my journey to taking over the Travis Manion Foundation. It was certainly not something I thought I was going to be doing with my life. I felt wholly unprepared to lead. And you said, I am never the smartest guy in the room ever. And I read that and I was like, that's me. So, one of the things when people, and I'd love to know what you meant when you shared that quote, but one of the things for me, when people talk about the growth of our organization and why we've been able to do what we've been able to do, I always share, like, because I hire people a lot smarter than me. And that is all about, like, that's how I have a winning team, because I hire extraordinary people. So love to know kind of what your insight was when you said that.
Yeah, totally. I'll say for me, like, one of the themes in my life is, from an early age, like I grew up playing sports, and, my family, I had the opportunity to play sports, and my parents definitely have emphasized education. And I grew up I was never as good an athlete as I wanted to be.
Yep.
I really wanted in high school, my dream was to like play sports at the next level. I was not a good enough athlete in high school to get a scholarship anywhere. Academically, I was good, not great, I would say. And so I grew up with a chip on my shoulder, for sure. I grew up with like a very healthy dose of imposter syndrome. That was true at the Naval Academy. That was true. I ended up playing rugby there. That was true there. I was never the fastest ever. I was never the strongest, never the most physically gifted. And I'd say, academically, and then coming out of the Marine Corps, my first job at Google, holy shit, I was like, there was zero chance of me being the smartest person in the room ever. And to some degree for me, that was really intimidating, for sure. And definitely fed this imposter syndrome. But one of the things that I learned really early in the Marine Corps, I remember my first unit, I got to this infantry unit, and, thought, here I am after 4 years at the Naval Academy, a year at TBS and IOC, learning how to lead, thought I knew what I was doing, showed up day one, and I was like, oh my God, I literally have no idea what I'm doing. I've got a platoon of 30 Marines, got to figure this out. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, I was really lucky to have this incredible, my first commanding officer, first company commander, was this prior enlisted, super seasoned, great, Marine officer. And he called me in after 2 weeks and he's like, how do you think it's going? And that's like, when you get that question, it's never going well. The
Right.
answer is never well. So I'm like, shit. I was like, and he basically was like, look, your job is to lead. Your job is not to do. You're running around trying to do your Marine's job for you. And that was like I'll never forget it. It was somewhat embarrassing that he had to tell me that.
Yeah.
And what that taught me really on is like, leadership is not about having the answer to everything. Leadership is not about being the smartest person in the room. In fact, if you think you're the smartest person in the room and you think you have all of the answers, you're probably a pretty ineffective leader. Your job as a leader is to build a team with, different points of view, different perspective, different sets of skills, and create the conditions where that team can deliver and execute at an exceptional level.
Yeah.
So it's about putting other people in a position to be successful. And, again, I've never been certainly at no tech company I've ever worked with. At CrossFit, I'm certainly not. Everyone else on the team has so much of a deeper and richer understanding of the CrossFit methodology and so just learning that my job is just about, again, it comes down to, how do I make sure we have a great team and that we create the conditions where they can do their best work.
And I would imagine that having that chip on your shoulder also gave you a competitive edge in some ways too.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was always, for me, that helped fuel, there was a lot of insecurity at points through my life, but that insecurity was drive, it translated into motivation and drive and work ethic. I remember getting to Google and I'm like, okay, I know less than everyone else here. And there's nothing I can do to manufacture. I don't have a degree in computer science. I'm not going to get one.
Yeah.
But I can control how hard I work.
Yep.
I can I learned how to do that in the Marine Corps. And it turns out that matters a lot.
Yeah. I felt a lot of that when I first took over this organization. And, in the beginning, I'm looking at all the other large veteran service organizations, and they were all run by men who were veterans. And I was neither of those. And so when you talk about that imposter syndrome, I felt it real bad. And I probably put more of it on myself than, I was like, no one's going to take me seriously. I'm a female that's not a veteran. Why am I running this organization? What place do I have in this? And, and for me, it made me work twice as hard to showcase that, I can still help to play a role in making sure that our military community is supported. But I felt that a lot.
I think the other thing it does is it keeps you humble.
Yeah.
And I think, my personal opinion, I think the most important trait in extraordinary leaders is humility. And, being open, recognizing you don't always have the right answer, that you have a lot to learn, creating the conditions where people are comfortable making mistakes and challenging you. Those are things that I think can be hard for a lot of leaders. And if you think you know the answer and have the answer, that can be a real challenge. And I think having that little bit of the chip on the shoulder forced me to be humble and hopefully keeps me humble as well.
Yeah. We have a character development program for youth, where we actually train veterans to deliver character education to our next generation. And our video that we show it's actually in the video. It's a lot of different vignettes on different veterans, and Jocko's in the one video, and it's Jocko talking about leadership. And Jocko, there's Jocko with his big square head in the video, and he's, and he comes on and he starts talking about, in order to be a good leader, you have to have humility. And I love the juxtaposition of him talking about humility to these kids. So when you said that, it's it reminded me of that video that hundreds of thousands of kids have seen across the country.
So cool.
I don't want to ignore the recent events that the CrossFit community has gone through. But what I'd love to know from you, and, would you consider this at the top of your tests of leadership?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, no doubt the tragedy at the games this year and, kind of navigating and making sure we do the right thing, in a period during which, the context is obviously different from the military, but at a moment like that, just extraordinarily challenging,
Yeah.
for everyone involved. And, again, trying to, as a team, as a leadership, lead through that and support the folks in the community who are hurting and suffering, et cetera, has been very, very challenging.
Yeah. I know we as an organization, we always try to anticipate where our vulnerability lies, and, you think about what a potential landmark event could look like for your organization. And so, I didn't want to not address that. I think it's, and I'd love to know if there's, is there anything, how you're continuing to communicate with the CrossFit community around all of that?
Yeah. So we right around the games, we committed and started an investigation at that point to make sure that we understood exactly what happened. And we're still working through that. That's happening. We hired an independent third party to do that. We've done our best to communicate with the community what we're doing and making sure that they understand the process and the path to do that. We've also had in parallel a series of conversations with folks in the community. So there are a lot of folks who wanted to share their perspective, their experience, et cetera. And so I personally have had conversations individually with tons of folks in the community, from individual athletes to affiliate owners to coaches to partners. And our commitment now, as we're going forward, is kind of communicating the path forward. And so, we're kind of doing the best we can to make sure that we listen, to make sure that we learn, to make sure we do the right thing, to understand exactly what happened, so we can move forward.
Yeah, I have I know some people within your leadership, and I just want to let you know that I don't know if they're saying it directly to you, but your leadership has been commended internally for sure. For whatever that means. Yeah.
Well, we're lucky, I think, we have an incredible team who has really supported each other. We have an incredible community. I mean, this, during such a challenging and tragic time, people have really come together to support each other. And, that's what the community is all about.
Yeah. It's, for me, like this podcast is called The Resilient Life. I coined it and named it that because, it's all about how we get through life's challenges and however they come at us. And you don't know the time or the place or what that's going to look like. And I always ask people like what living a resilient life looks like for them. And I think this is probably for you, this is probably something that's on your mind a lot. And I'd love to know if like you've thought about that idea of like resilience at a time like this.
For sure. I have been personally so blessed in my life. My wife and I talk about this a lot. From an early age, won the lottery at like every turn, born into an incredible family, born into incredible circumstance, had a chance to great education, great community, great schools, got exposed to sports, which have brought me so much joy over my life. The chance to go to the Naval Academy and serve. I mean, you name it, the luck and serendipity in my life of the opportunities that I've had that are moments in time and luck and being afforded. So I very much recognize that, the Naval Academy is challenging. The Marine Corps is challenging. Deploying is challenging, but gosh, I've been so blessed in my life. And at the same time, recognize that like life is hard.
Yeah.
Even when you're blessed, you're going to find most often there are going to be moments when you've got to, you or someone close to you, your family, have to work through, that gut punch. And part of what I am most grateful for about my time having served, there's a lot of things that I'm grateful for. My time in the Naval Academy, my time in the Marine Corps was learning how to deal with adversity, learning how to do hard things, learning what it means to be a leader in a moment of adversity, being surrounded by people who support you and care about you, what we are going through at CrossFit now, my family's gone through some challenging things in our life. And those experiences, you can't avoid adversity in life unless you're just blindly lucky.
Yeah.
And I think resilience is a muscle. It's a learned thing like anything else. And my wife and I talk all the time now about, through the lens of being a parent, what is our job? What is our responsibility? And I think a huge part of and it's hard as a parent, right? Because you want to protect your kids. But I want my girls to do hard things now. And they do that through sports. They do that through other things. And we try to expose them to things in their, kids go through hard things socially. And I think that is a really essential part of life, is learning how to deal with adversity and learning how to be a person of character, learning how to be a person of principle, learning how to support each other. I'll tell you, I've had many moments in the past year or two where I've been in the low trough of like, "Ooh, this is really hard."
Yeah.
How do you continue to put one foot in front of another? And so I will say, like, and my wife and I also talk about this, some of the stuff that we've gone through personally. We always say, like, we're going to look back in decades, and yes, there will be things we've gone through that have been hard and tragic, but I think we're going to look back and be grateful for a lot of them, because often those hard moments in your life can bring opportunities that you never would have anticipated. It doesn't change the hard thing. You still wish it hadn't happened, but there can be beautiful parts of life that come out of that adversity and come out of those challenges that, I think you can be grateful for. So, I think it's an unavoidable and important part of life. And sometimes the hard moments make the positive moments that much richer and more gratifying.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something really interesting there, that no one has really brought up, when I get into this subject and talk about this a little bit, is this idea that we actually have to teach our kids. Like, you have to teach your kids to be resilient. This is not just something where they're going to get that gut punch thrown at them, whatever it may be, and it's just like, kid, be resilient. Like, you have to train them so when they get to adulthood and they find out that life is pretty hard, they're going to know how to do that. And, I say to my kids all the time, like, you can do hard things, and the more my kid doesn't want to do something is the more I try to convince them that is exactly what they need to do, So,
and it's hard because my opinion, the only way that you build resilience is being exposed to hard things that make you uncomfortable and make you suffer a little bit. And when you're a parent,
that's heartbreaking.
It's so hard, right? Yes. It's my wife and I joke about this all the time. She's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah." My oldest daughter actually has a coach right now who I'm so grateful for, because he pushes, my daughter's 11, and he is really hard on them in a way that makes them uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But I'm so grateful for, because like, my daughter has grown so much under this coach who has held her to a high standard, who has pushed her in ways that have made her at times really uncomfortable for.
Yeah.
And I'm like, gosh, like, the growth that she has seen by virtue of that. But it's hard as a parent. Totally. Your instinct is to protect your kids all the time and insulate them, right? But that can backfire if your kid, has never seen difficulty and adversity. They can't avoid it their whole life. Yeah.
And I found that out real quick, being a parent of a plebe, because I get to hear everything now, and I'm like, wow, could they do that to you, But you're just like, you just step back and you're like, hey, got to deal with it. Like, and my husband always says, like, listen, you're going to deal with assholes your whole life. You got to deal with it. Like, this is the real world now, kid. So,
yeah.
Don, well, I just want to, I want to give like a public thank you to the entire CrossFit community for your belief and support of the Travis Manion Foundation, and not just our organization, but you do a ton of work with veteran service organizations, and I think showing that connection between CrossFit and the support for the greater military community. I'm not sure. I hope you guys know how much that means and how important that is. And, you know, I just wanted to make sure I gave that public thank you to you and to CrossFit as a whole, because, you know, we feel really privileged and blessed to have you guys as partners as we move forward.
Well, you know, I would say, thank you and your organization for what you guys do. It matters. It's important. It is that I'll speak for us, so like at HQ, it's a privilege for us to be a part of it, to play a tiny role. And, you know, for me, one of the greatest blessings of this job is being able to be a part of a community. You know, really who you're saying thank you to are the gym owners,
yep,
the coaches out there who pour their life into serving and helping other people, who are, you know, running these charity events and supporting organizations on top of everything else they do. And they do it because they have a commitment to service, to helping people. And I know they probably feel just as grateful to be connected to what you guys do as vice versa, which is what makes it such kind of a natural and awesome fit. And excited for next April.
Yep.
I'm going to get my training on.
Yes.
Lots of spots.
Yes. We've got a few months, well, a little more than a few months, but as I learned, like last year was the first year that I did the Manion WOD as prescribed for women. And I had to train for a long time.
Oh yeah.
You know, I strictly, like, all I was doing was back squats. You know, 3 days a week, just coming down. I didn't really focus too much on the running because I run. And then when I actually started doing it, I was like, shit, I probably should have been running a little bit more.
My legs are really heavy.
Yeah. So Manion WOD coming up at the end of April. We're excited to blow that out of the water again with the support of the CrossFit community. Don, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, thanks for what you guys do.